Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel, and it's Friday. You made it. The weekend is here. Baseball is starting again tonight. That's spectacular news. If you don't know it, they call yesterday the slowest day in sports. If you don't know that in the sports media world, because the NBA has concluded, the NHL is done. Football practices, the NFL hasn't started yet with any sort of off-season activities or summer camps or training camps. And there are no baseball games. Of course, the All-Star game was on Tuesday night, and all the media, the coverage of it on Wednesday happens. And on Thursday, there's just not a lot to do. The only thing going on, of course, this week is a big golf tournament, but that's in England. I guess technically in Scotland, which will be its own country probably here in a few years. So that's over there. It's not like it's the Masters going on or the PGA or the U.S. Open, which are here, and then a lot of sports writers are going to be there. There's just nothing to do, nothing to write about. And so it was kind of funny on local Pittsburgh radio, sports radio, which I listen to, even though I live here in Florida, that the news guys were covering made-up sports stories. They were talking about wiffle ball games and things like that, and local golfers just making stuff. It wasn't real. It was just making stuff up. Like little Timmy Smith went 3 for 4 in a backyard wiffle ball game last night with 3 RBIs. Pitcher struck out 2, something like that. Pretty funny. And they were doing fake golf stories. Like a golfer said, yeah, I would have had a hole-in-one had they put the hole in this different location. Stuff like that. So if you didn't know that, the Thursday of the All-Star Game week is seen as the slowest day in sports. Now, today, once again, baseball is getting started, and there will be baseball every day until the playoffs start, I guess, in October. And then we'll have NFL by that time, and NHL. It's unbelievable. But speaking of golf, my man Phil Mickelson shoots a 63, so close to shooting a 62. He has a shot. He's leading after the second round. I'll be watching it this weekend. Get up early to watch that. And he won the British Open back in 2013. In fact, that's his last win, if you can believe it. So he's not going to get many more chances to win a major and even just maybe win some just regular tournaments. So I hope he can keep it together this week. And I think if he can keep his game together, he'll win. But if he starts doing Phil things, then he's going to have a tough time. So, but it'll be fun to watch anyway. He will be on the last card. He'll be the last guy to go out on Saturday because he's leading with a score of 10 under. Where is the stock market going? Before I get into what happened last night in Nice, France, where is the stock market going? Have you been paying attention to it? It's setting daily records. Every day it's setting a new record going up. It's like at 18.5 today. The New York Stock Exchange, the Dow Jones, and all these other indexes. I know the Dow is breaking new ground, but I know the other ones are pretty close to getting to record highs as well. It's crazy. I would tell you that the economy is not that great. I think there's a lot of signs that it's not, and maybe that just shows how disconnected the stock market is from the economy. And what have stockbrokers for years been telling us? That the stock market is not the economy. They can be two different things. One can go up and the other can go down, and vice versa. But it is amazing. I don't know if this was foreseen. If you remember this time last year, right around this time is when all of that China stuff started popping up. And last August, American markets took a huge hammering. Huge hammering. Hope that doesn't happen this year. So, very surprised what's going on in the stock market right now. But maybe because, despite being told not to do so, I continue to equate the economy with the stock market. So let's get to Nice, France. I was telling a friend of mine last night after I got home from trivia. Our team came in 5th. Did not know the final question. Did not know the theater where John Dillinger was shot. It's the Biograph Theater, if you don't know. Didn't know that final question, so we got passed up by a couple teams. Who knows that answer? It's beyond me. I know some of the teams are cheating. What are you going to do? But I was telling a friend of mine last night that you can't, and this was right about the time that their president, Hollande, was making his speech. And I said something to the effect of, there is nothing more ironic than the president of a country who has a barber that's on retainer, I guess you'd say, for $11,000 a month, talking to his people about a terrorist attack. That feels to me like what France used to be before. And if you don't know, yesterday was Bastille Day there, where the commoners overthrew the monarchy. And in fact, I was just talking about the difference between our revolution in the 1700s and their revolution years later. Ours was done by rich guys. Theirs was done by poor people. And I think that has been a main difference between us and them since then. But Bastille Day was yesterday, and that's why all these people were gathered. But it certainly sounds like the pre-Bastille days, where the monarchy would be outraged about something and trying to act like they are so in touch with the commoners. Democracy and voting and rights, although the French do not have rights like Americans do. The French look at rights a little bit differently. It feels like the monarchy era in France. You can't take that seriously when Hollande is going to come out and do that, but at the same time everybody knows that his attitudes towards personal grooming. I would say that a president of a country who has a barber on retainer for that much can't be serious about fighting terrorism. Now, to the particulars of the attack, I am left with something. Granted, there's going to be a lot of information that's going to come out on this. Where this terrorist got the truck, how long he had been planning it, and all that. It's just like every other attack. They'll just continue to delve into it, and find out why it happened. Just like they'll continue to do with the Dallas shooting, even though that wasn't a militant Muslim that did that. But I remember, I'm not a big crowds guy. It's just part of my personality. Large crowds, people rubbing up against each other, things, not my cup of tea. But I can remember going back to, I'm going to say it was New Year's Eve, either from going from 1999 or 2000 or 2000 to 2001. It was one of those years. It was before September 11th. It was me, my brother, and his kids who were teenagers at the time. And we were down on the Strip for New Year's. As you can imagine, in Las Vegas, you can imagine that was a crazy time. Because either one way or the other, whatever year it was, people were thinking, hey, it's the end of the millennium, when the end of the millennium really was when 2001 came around. But any case. So there were a lot of people down there because of that. And New Year's Eve, the Strip is always busy. But they actually block all of those roads off. They block off the Strip, I'm going to say, from Tropicana north the whole way to Spring Mountain, something like that, somewhere in there. You have to get on a Las Vegas map, I guess, to understand that. But there are gates that are actually in place, and where there are no gates, they actually bring in 18-wheeler trailers and block the area. This is before September 11th. So 16 years ago, about. Because of the very thing that could happen like it did yesterday in Nice, France, where they were having a celebration. And it seems like this truck just drove right into the crowd as if terrorism doesn't exist. And see, that's part of it. If you have a police department or the French military that knows over the last how many years that terrorists have struck in France, and we're going to get into a little bit about that, why it's France. If you know that a bunch of people are getting together, thousands of people, a celebration just like our Independence Day, and you know terrorist attacks have happened, I'm sure they're thinking, well, we have to be aware of something, but you don't even set up barriers where people are going to be standing in streets that are normally traveled. And you can watch the video of this truck going down the street. Somebody must have been videotaping it, just knew something was up, videotaping from using their phone, of course, from a hotel. And there's a policeman there trying to shoot at the driver as this truck goes by. How does the truck even get that close in the first place? Do they not have Jersey barriers in France? Do they not have that? See, I would say that a country that it can't even set up barriers for a celebration, unless you're going to tell me that terrorist knew a way to slip in, or there were other people involved who moved the barriers. Then I would ask, well, weren't the police at the barriers too, like they did in Las Vegas 16 years ago? I start to really question if a country is really serious about protecting its citizens when you can't set up some barriers to block a truck. Hey, you know what? I mean, as bad as it was, and at this point there are 84 killed, and at least 2 of those people are Americans, a father and son from Texas. What if that truck had a bomb in it? And I don't even mean a nuclear bomb. I mean like a bomb that from like Oklahoma City. This 84 number would be minuscule compared to that. And once again, that's why barriers are set up. Right? That's why they're set up. To keep anything like that away from people. And we all know that those things happen. Don't get me wrong. There are instances, I remember a few years ago, was it in Santa Monica, where an old person, I don't know if they were mad or they had some medical event, plowed through a bunch of people and killed some people. That's just some little artsy festival or whatever they were having there. I don't remember the specific event, but I'm sure I could find it on Google. But when you're talking about terrorism, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people getting together. And you just had what happened earlier this year and last year and all those years before that. You just get the feeling, at least the way I see it standing here in the United States, that France, although the president with his $11,000 haircut is saying they're serious, they aren't even taking the most rudimentary of steps when these kinds of gatherings take place. Now, I'm reading that the French police are going on buses and trains and carding anybody that they think is Muslim or from Middle Eastern descent. This particular guy who was eventually shot to death was from Tunisia. Now, I understand that the French military, French police, have been carding a lot of these people, investigating these people, but when there are actually gatherings, what are they doing? Doesn't seem like much. I should say, and this is something interesting going back to the Bataclan attack. Are we even, I just go to Wikipedia, I go to a couple places just to see the timeline of events that happened, for example, in the Bataclan, that concert attack from last year, which was, and of course there was other places where terrorism happened that night in Paris. Still not clear how those people got into that venue in the first place. I mean, we know what happened in Orlando with a guy shooting his way into there, and there was an off-duty cop there, and there was a shootout, but the guy eventually, and we've been through that already, the flaws in that kind of security plan. But in France, we still don't know how those people actually, did they walk in a back door? Did they walk in the front door? Did they shoot everybody that was manning the ticket counter at the Bataclan? And so how much are we going to hear about how this terrorist got his hands on what I guess is a rented truck, was able to drive right down the street where people were standing in the streets and plow through these people? I've seen the video. I saw the video of the truck accelerating toward the group and people just running in every direction. In addition, I saw the video of the aftermath, somebody with a phone going through and seeing these people who are obviously dead, pools of blood by their head and by their, next to them, coming out from their heads, from their bodies, people screaming. I've told you my attitude toward travel and vacations and everything these days. I don't even think about going to another country. Not to say we're perfect. We have flaws too. We make mistakes. The terrorists have been successful a couple times within the last year. But I still think that it's worse elsewhere. Because I don't know, first of all, you're going into a country where nobody is allowed to own any guns. And it's just hard to get a feel for how serious they really are about stopping this stuff. So I'll take my chances here in the United States for the foreseeable future. And then I'll make a decision whether I want to go to any of these countries. As you know, I'm not big into travel anyway. But it just seems like something like this. Now, trucks have been used before, and I guess that makes this story even worse. I was reading an article, CNN, Fox News, about other terrorist attacks that have used trucks to run people over. In fact, one of them, it ended up that the guy ended up beheading his boss. So this isn't new, and still the French don't seem to have an answer for it. These are the types of things, along with the president of France and his attitude. I don't even care about his politics and him being a socialist at this point. But Western civilization cannot survive like this. It just can't. I don't know what the liberal plan is there or here to try to fix all this. I know what they're saying. But the way I look at liberals in this country when it comes to terror is how I look at Quakers and Mennonites, like during World War II. None of them wanted to fight. The only reason the Quakers and the Mennonites still exist in the United States is because a bunch of Christians and Jews and probably atheists went and fought the Germans and the Japanese. But because the Mennonites and the Quakers don't believe in violence, they get to benefit from all these other religious people dying. Right? Conscientious objectors, I guess just like Muhammad Ali for the Vietnam War. Meanwhile, the only reason their Quaker ideology and whatever else non-aggression ideologies exist is because there are people who believe in aggression. That drives me nuts. That drives me bonkers. We do have religious freedom in this country. But do you take it is it too far when people say, well, my religion says I can't raise a hand toward another person no matter what they're doing to me? Okay, then I guess we'll just let the Nazis kill you guys first. Let's just let the Japanese of Imperial Japan of the 1930s, early 1940s, come over here and kill you guys first, because that's what they want to do. And being that you believe in non-aggression, we'll just go along with your ideology, and we'll let you guys die. With liberalism and its attitude toward terrorism in this 21st century, the only reason that liberalism exists is because a lot of other people don't think like that. There's a lot of men and women who believe that, yes, we actually have to do something, and we have to call it militant Islam and radical Islam, and we have to attach the religion to the violence and the rest of it. Meanwhile, we have a president and Democrat nominee, presumed, and millions of people in this country who take a different attitude. But the only reason they exist is because a bunch of other people have a different attitude. So, as far as France goes, what I read about it and why these terrorist attacks seem to happen there and not in Germany or Italy or some of these other modern countries in Europe, it seems to me, my perception, once again, never been to France, probably will never go to France. My perception is that France has more of these people, first of all, than those other countries do. And in fact, even before all of this migrant wave from northern Africa and the Middle East, Syria, and elsewhere, my perception was always that France had more of these types of people from outside of France than Germany or any of these other countries did. So they're already there. This is, I mentioned talking to this friend of mine last night. He talks about he mentioned something about immigration. And I said, see, this is why I am not as crazy about immigration as other conservatives are, is because you start to understand, at least in France's case, and even in the United States case, we're so worried about immigration that we just slough over the fact that a lot of the people are already here. And in fact, a lot of them are American citizens. Just like in France, a lot of these guys who cook this stuff up, yes, their parents may be from Syria or Tunisia or Libya or Iraq or wherever else. But they're second-generation French, third-generation French. And still, they want to kill people in their own country. At that point, does your immigration policy really matter? It matters, I guess, to keep more out. But it certainly doesn't do anything about the people who are already there. It's no different than if we... Now, granted, in our case, the people who have been American citizens, whether in San Bernardino or in Orlando, being American citizens, they're legal American citizens. You can't ship them anywhere. Maybe you can ship them to Guantanamo if it's still open. But surely you can't ship them back to where their ancestors came from. That seems like a weird conclusion to that. And this is one of the flaws that I've had regarding Donald Trump and his attitude toward immigration. I'll say it again. I don't know how you determine who's a Muslim and who isn't trying to get into this country. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you look at a person and tell and say, oh, this is a Christian, that's a Jew, that's a Muslim, this is a Buddhist. Even if you were to ask me, well, Ed, prove you're a Christian. I don't know. In the beginning, there was light. Do I have to quote a Bible verse? It might be a little tough to do that. But if I can't do it, it certainly doesn't make me a Muslim. It certainly doesn't make me a Buddhist. See, these are things that go back to this talk that I've had with you about common sense. Well, the common sense thing is just to keep the Muslims out of the country. How are you going to do that? See, a lot of this stuff is you actually have to know something. Common sense isn't enough. Common sense a lot of times is just a knee-jerk reaction. So France, it just seems that they have more of these people. They have allowed more of these people in prior generations, going back to the 2000s, the 1990s, 1980s. Whereas Germany and some of these other countries, when these countries were more autonomous before the EU, might have had different immigration policies. I think that's part of it. I think it also doesn't help, and maybe I'm just drawing a stereotype here, is that French people, at least the people who've had ancestors there for 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. Of course, in France, it could be 200 years, 300 years. Maybe they're a little more arrogant. French do have the reputation of being arrogant. And they exclude these people, even though the French people tend to be inclusive. Maybe they are arrogant. I think you do have those no-go zones. We're going back to the Charlie Hebdo attack. You hear about these no-go zones where police don't go, and the Muslims themselves rule these streets, and the French law of the country has no standing. And it just seems like there is more of that there than in other countries. It seems like that happens in Belgium as well, given a lot of those, some of those attackers in France going back to last year were from that area. It just doesn't, we don't get that kind of news, that reporting from some of these other countries, from Spain. Once again, going through Austria, Germany, Italy. And even in England, I think that this is kind of what is going on as well. My perception is that they have unfortunately followed the French idea regarding the acceptance of the people who are British, but their parents or their grandparents or somebody else, just letting them do their own thing and not really assimilating. Not to sound like go Star Trek and the Borg here. I think it all matters. I think something else that matters is something that I continue to talk about, and I finally saw somebody writing about this at, I believe, hotair.com. I forget who the writer was or what. It was about the Nice attack, but that this guy who did this right now, maybe they're gonna find some accomplices who help him rent the truck or load the truck up or got him his guns, whatever the case may be. But these people, these men mostly, don't need to be in contact with ISIS and on the phone, texting, email, tweeting to know what they have to do, to be motivated to do what they end up doing. Just seeing ISIS in the news is enough. And that's why I've said that as long as ISIS continues to be in the news, and it's seen as it doesn't even have to be gaining territory, that is just continuing to put up a fight. And once in a while, there's a decapitation video that pops up. That alone, without any other direct contact, that is enough to motivate some of these guys to go and do what they do. They want to be associated with a winner. They want to be seen as part of the cause. And this is why the way that the United States and other countries have treated ISIS, not going at them full force, but only at about 10%, this is what you get. ISIS in the news every day, people not being necessarily associated with them, getting motivated to commit terrorist acts. Now, you tell me how the FBI or any other police organization anywhere is supposed to figure all that out. You can't. That's why to solve the terrorism in the United States, France, elsewhere, you have to fight them over there where they mostly are and get them out of the news by killing all of them. But I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we're back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I did happen to run across a story, speaking of torture and going back to the attacks at the Bataclan from last year, that news is now coming out. I think I saw this on heatstreet.com, that the victims at least at the concert venue, were tortured before they died, or probably died while they were being tortured. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of all that, but it just, once again, it just shows, are we really serious? Why do you cover up? Why do you have to wait? I guess it would be 9 months, about 8-9 months, to release that kind of information. And why does it have to be leaked? Why doesn't it come out? You don't have to name any names. You don't have to say that John Smith had this done to him and Jane Doe had this done to her. Who are they trying to protect when authorities don't release all of the information about how violent some of these attacks are? The only people they're protecting are the terrorists. Once again, going back to, is France and some of these other countries, is this somehow going back to the monarchy days? Of course, when I think of this, I think of, unfortunately, it's History of the World Part 1 with Mel Brooks and him staring into the camera and saying, "It's good to be the king." This is kind of what that feels like. And if you'll remember, that part of that movie ends with what? Bastille Day. Or is it Bastille Day? Bastille Day. Covering up, don't want anybody to know, allegedly don't want to embarrass anybody. It's so gruesome that we didn't want to put this out in the public. First key to beating anybody is knowing your enemy. And the more they don't want to talk about it, and we know what goes on in the United States with having to use proper language and can't say this and can't say that, can't say it has anything to do with Islam and everything, the less you know your enemy and the more they get away with. That's why I said to this friend of mine last night, I don't know how Western civilization can survive like this. I was telling him, you fail and you fail and you fail, and then at some point you just simply lose, and there are no more games. The season's over. No different than a sports season. Losing one game in particular is no big deal, but you lose enough of them, and your chances of winning the season go to zero. This kind of feels like that. We could win some sort of war of attrition with radical Islam and these terrorists and everything. It's just we don't have the heart for it. Our politicians don't have the heart for it. Dare I say it, a lot of the American people don't have a heart for it. And I don't even just mean liberals, but I think a lot of conservatives have grown weary of this. They talk about fighting the war, and I know a lot of them believe it. But it's probably going to take more work than you think. But it shouldn't be long. We shouldn't be 15 years into all of this and still wondering how we defeat terrorism. Meanwhile, Barack Obama, who got us entirely out of Iraq, which virtually allowed ISIS to come to power, is now sending people back to Iraq. Just a few, 650, which is like nothing. And I'm sure if he's asked, he's going to say they're in non-combatant positions. There's no bullets going to be whizzing over their heads. Just like he explained that death of that SEAL a couple months ago, when that SEAL was obviously involved in some sort of conflict, battle, and the administration wanted to deny it. I don't know. But it's terrible, but something, once again, this is something that would have been prevented by barriers being put up. Just something simple as that. Couldn't get it done. I'm not that, of course, that I wanted it to happen, but the terrorist attack going back to Paris last year, I know there are a lot of people involved, but I don't know how you necessarily avoid something like that with how you set a city up or anything like that. You have to catch them beforehand. Because once they're out of the house that night, they're going to end up killing somebody that night. Where something like this, that a guy can just drive a truck right through all of these people, that should have been covered in Protection Against Terrorism 101. Let's move on to something else. I think that this Delegates Unbound, the whole controversy where delegates can vote their conscience, seems like this is coming to a very dismal end. It seems. As has been stated at Red State and a couple other places, and I've stated it before, I don't know how much we never Trump people have to be responsible for trying to save the GOP from itself. I think of a conversation I had with this friend that I always talk politics with because he's very astute. And he's much more of a company guy than I am. Oh, speak on a side note, I finally got my voting card. I think I got it yesterday, the day before, in Florida. It has unaffiliated on it. Doesn't say the word entirely out, but I now have my card in which I'm not part of the Republican Party anymore. Just so you know. It's official now. But I was talking to him, and he had said several months ago about the delegates themselves and getting to that 1237 number that there's something that turned his stomach about Trump getting to that number, and then there still being people at the convention who want to fight against him. And he thought that that's kind of undermining the spirit of the competition, and this is the way that it's drawn up. And I made clear to him that, and this was before Trump was anywhere near 1237. This is probably maybe when he only had 400 delegates or something like that early on. But the reason we were talking about it is because Trump was overperforming expectations. And I said, as long as it's legal, then I have nothing. If delegates want to change their minds and everything, this isn't the Soviet Union where we have to get inside people's minds. It also helps regarding this that I tend to be a little bit of an elitist. That we do not have a country where people vote for president. States do. That's why we have the Electoral College. Why? Because the Founding Fathers were a little fearful of mob rule. Just majority all the time. Gets to push around the minority. And so that was my attitude, and as you know, I tend to get a little bit more off the reservation than a lot of conservatives. And this was just in contrast to what this friend of mine was saying. But when it gets to this, I guess that my attitude, I wouldn't say my attitude changed, it's just continued to develop and mature, is that once Ted Cruz decided to drop out as fast as he did after Indiana, then that's when you just can't save them from themselves. I think this is, being that we're talking about Christian verses and stories in the first half of this show, it's somewhat like Noah. He kept telling people, this flood's coming. No, I'm not a kook. I'm building this ark. And I guess this goes along well with this ark that's now been built in Kentucky. In modern times, that's fascinating. People would do that. But kept telling people, flood's coming. God's going to do this. God's going to do that. He starts rounding up all these animals, if you want to believe that. And then the flood hits, and then suddenly what? Everybody wants in the boat. Unfortunately, if Noah would have opened up the door at that time, he and his family and all those animals, they would have been flooded too. This is kind of what that feels like. And Noah was under no responsibility at that point to save these people. He'd already told them that they didn't believe him. What are you going to do? This is kind of the way it sounds like now. It's the way it feels to me. As I see these people like Ann Coulter and the rest of them seeing that Donald Trump is going to pick Mike Pence. That was an announcement that was supposed to happen today, but it got pushed back because of what happened in France. That suddenly now they're the ones that are kind of starting to stroll a little quicker toward the ark and hoping that they can jump on it. And it's just too late. Likewise with this Kendall Unruh from Colorado. I guess he's just a regular teacher somewhere that tried to head up this delegation to try to make it so delegates could vote their conscience and do whatever they wanted. They were not responsible to the voters and everything. And it seems, and I'm not going to get into the back and forths and it's trying to read it is so confusing anyway, so I'm not going to try to explain it to you. Let's just say that it's somewhat failed. That sometimes you just have to let things go the way they go and let people reap what they've sown. And I think this is a little bit different attitude than what this friend of mine has voiced for a long time about just, well, people voted, and if he gets the 1237, then we should just get all behind him, and that's the way it's supposed to work if you're a good party member. I don't have any responsibilities to the party. It's never given me any money. It's never given me any power. I've been a loyal Republican for a long time, voting for Mitt Romney and for John McCain and other politicians that I probably wouldn't have voted for otherwise. And I'm done. I'm done. Just like no, I'm done trying to tell these people that the rain's coming. At some point, I have to get back to building my ark. Because all this preaching and telling people is, hey, I'm on a timeline here. I got deadlines to meet. The flood's coming. If I don't get everything sewn up in time and all these nails in this wood or whatever, if I can't get this thing to float, I'm in big trouble. At some point, you have to save yourself. And more in this case, regarding the GOP, you have to save your conscience. You have to save your mind. You have to realize that, you know what? I think I've done enough here. I've done everything that I can do. And the truth is, there are millions and millions and millions of Republicans who want Donald Trump. So what are you going to do? They want what they want, and they're going to get it. Good and hard. But at some point, there has to be a certain amount of people who back away because they don't want to be tainted by this. Because maybe overall they want to have some credibility when all of this goes wrong. instead of having a situation where everybody's all in, and then afterwards everybody gets to point the finger at everybody else. So I feel for these people. I know that this Kendall Unruh, I think that's how you say his last name, and others that tried to do this with the committees, their heart is in the right place. And that's what makes this, I guess, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but at some point you can get too caught up in it. At some point, by trying to oppose it as much as you do, you end up being that this book keeps coming up more and more on this show, you end up becoming like Captain Ahab. And Donald Trump is Moby Dick. And then in an effort to slay him, you're destroying yourself. You have to know where that line is and not to cross it. And you have to figure that out beforehand, not while you're doing it. While you're doing it, you're just going to convince yourself, well, I just needed a little bit more work. A little bit more. A little bit more. So I hope for Kendall Unruh and these other people that they had this figured out beforehand. And there's a good article at Red State regarding this very idea. That at some point, you just have to let people have what they want. They're adults. They can read. They can write. They watch TV. They go to websites. They've made a decision that Donald Trump is a good choice. Okay. See, that's, I guess, what I believe. Why it's easy for me, probably than a lot of other people, to be never Trump, because I'm much more of a soft sell. Even though I've devoted a lot of time to Donald Trump and being against him over the last year, and about a year. I've said that eventually it's just going to be okay. I'm not going to hold it against you. I know you're maybe going to continue to despise me because I don't go along with your cult, but I'm not going to, after this is all over, I'm not going to hate you or anything. You want to do that? Okay. And I have to admit that I am heartened by the fact that everything that I've said that is going to happen has happened. He's picked Mike Pence, a person who his own supporters don't like. A guy, Mike Pence, who is pretty lax on immigration. I predicted this. Only because I think, obviously, I knew Donald Trump better than a lot of other people did. Just don't know him personally. Just have known people like him in my life. So, but I don't know where I suppose that the Republican Party is going to work its way through this. And as you know, a couple days ago, we were talking about these Quinnipiac polls that showed that Donald Trump's doing well. Well, to counter that, NBC has a bunch of polls out that if they're true, Hillary Clinton's going to win about 40 states. And then I saw there was some other site that said that Trump is up nationally 43 to 40%. I guess you can choose to believe what you want regarding all of this. As far as the VP announcement and Mike Pence, just getting into taking the politics out of it, I guess Trump decided to delay his announcement, and now during me recording the show today, during the recording of the show today, he chose to officially, I guess, come out and say, yeah, it's him. And the reason he wanted to delay it was because of what happened in France last night. Good move, bad move? I don't know. Could debate it either way. I would say, being that I think I know Trump the way that I do, is that he delayed it because he wants to have center stage. He didn't do it because of respect to France and terrorism in the world. Instead, he did it maybe just because he wanted to control the news cycle. I don't know. See, I would think of it as I'm going to announce my vice presidential candidate, and then I'm going to give a really good with him there, and then we're going to both give these great speeches about how we're going to kick ISIS's butt. Now, I know that's what Trump has said, and I don't know exactly what Mike Pence's attitude is toward ISIS and what his plan is. I don't know. We've heard a lot about Ted Cruz's and Marco Rubio's and John Kasich's only because they were actually running for president. This probably would have been a good opportunity to do that at a press conference. Donald Trump's chose something different. One more thing before I go, and this is a story that I've been putting off for a couple days just because of other news working its way in. This decision that came down at The Hague, I know that when I start agreeing with verdicts and rulings that come out of The Hague, I know that something weird is going on. That The Hague ruled against China in this conflict that they've had with the Philippines over these islands in the South China Sea. This goes back to this island that bunch of rocks. It's just there's this reef out there in the South China Sea, and what China started doing was it built an island on top of the reef, pretty close to the Philippines and these other countries. And of course they're doing it because China says that it's our territory. It is historically ours. And this ruling went to the Philippines, or went to the Hague, and the Hague says no. And suddenly you have a decision where they're trying to determine what actually an island is. If you don't know it, a rock that is just out in the ocean and peeking out through the waves is not considered an island. An island is considered to be something that can sustain life, and I guess it can't be artificial island. But that's what the Chinese did out there. Nobody stopped them. We didn't stop them. And this is also, if you remember from a few months ago, one of our ships, military ships, sailed close to there, and the Chinese got all ticked off, and we flew a surveillance plane over it, and they got all ticked off. It's all about that. And what's happened because of this is there have been some shootings, boats being sunk. You have Philippines against China, and then Vietnam getting involved. The Senkakus with Japan and China. China is certainly not playing very nice with its neighbors. And this is what bullies do. China knows that it's bigger than most of these countries. It has a larger military than most of these countries. And so these countries are a little afraid of China, but they're looking for outside help, and the United States is not giving them too much. But the decision was that the Spratly Islands, I just have it written down here in the notes, the Spratly Islands are not islands. And what China has done is not legal. And China's, of course, blowing off the entire thing. So we'll see where that goes. Just have to see. But I got to go. It's the end of the show. You can go to edwarddentzel.com. Find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows there. Podbean, Podomatic, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can email me, edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain. You can, what else can you? You can find my books on Amazon.com. Just do a search for Edward Dentzel there. I have 4 books, I think, available for download there. Pretty cheap. It won't break your bank. And that's all I got. I hope you all have a great weekend. Have a great night as well. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.